Daniel had always been a man of routine. Every morning, the same cup of coffee, the same path to work, the same quiet evenings spent reading or watching television. It was a life of simplicity, predictability, comfortable in its own way. But that comfort began to erode the day he first saw them. It started on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. Daniel was at the grocery store, pushing a half-empty cart down the cereal aisle, when he noticed a man at the far end of the row. The man wasn't shopping. He wasn't even moving. He just stood there, staring. Daniel glanced at him, expecting the stranger to look away, but the man's eyes remained fixed. Uneasy, Daniel hurried through the rest of his shopping, only to spot the same man again, this time standing near the exit, watching him as he left. Daniel shrugged it off, chalking it up to a strange coincidence. After all, the world was full of odd people, and not everyone adhered to social norms. But over the next few days, he began to notice more. A woman at the park during his morning run, sitting alone on a bench, her gaze never wavering from him. She was there again when he finished his route, in the exact same spot, as if she hadn't moved at all. Then there was a tall man standing across the street from his house late one night, motionless under the pale glow of the street lamp. Every time Daniel looked, they were there. Different faces, different places, but always watching. The odd encounters began to gnaw at Daniel's mind. He started scanning crowds, peering out his windows at odd hours, looking for these strangers that seemed to follow him. No one else seemed to notice them. He asked his neighbor if they had seen anyone strange hanging around, but they just laughed it off. "You're imagining things," they said. But Daniel knew better. The way they stood, so still, so silent, it was wrong. As days turned into weeks, the watchers became a constant presence in his life. They appeared at the grocery store, in the park, on the street, always standing just far enough away to be unnerving, but close enough to make their presence unmistakable. Daniel's sleep became restless. He would dream of them. Dark, endless corridors where they stood at every turn, faceless and unmoving, their eyes fixed on him. He would wake up drenched in sweat, only to find them outside his window watching. His grip on reality began to slip. He tried to confront them several times. One night, he rushed out of his house toward a man standing near his driveway, but as soon as he got close, the figure vanished into the shadows without a sound. Another time, in broad daylight, he spotted a woman standing at the end of his street. He called out to her, demanding to know what she wanted, but she turned the corner, disappearing as if she'd never been there at all. The paranoia consumed him. Daniel stopped going to work, stopped jogging in the park, stopped answering calls from concerned friends. His world shrank to the four walls of his home, but even there, he wasn't safe. The watchers were always nearby, at the edge of his property, in the shadows of his living room at night, glimpsed through reflections in mirrors and windows. One evening, after another sleepless night, Daniel decided he had had enough. He was going to find out what they were once and for all. He grabbed a flashlight and stormed out into his yard. The street was empty, as usual, except for a figure standing at the far end of the block. Daniel felt a surge of anger and fear. He marched towards the figure, but with every step, something in the air shifted. The air grew heavier, colder. His footsteps slowed. As he drew closer, the figure became clearer, its face obscured, but its eyes sharp, dark, and endless. "Who are you?" Daniel shouted, his voice trembling. The figure didn't move. "Why are you following me?" Still no answer. Desperation clawed at him. He was close enough now to touch the figure, but something about it was wrong. Its features were indistinct, like a blur in the corner of his vision that refused to come into focus. Before Daniel could speak again, the figure began to shift. Its face, or what passed for one, seemed to twist and warp, and in that moment, Daniel realized with dawning horror that this was no person. The Watchers were never human. They were something else, something ancient, something he couldn't comprehend. He stumbled backward, his mind reeling with terror. He turned to flee, rushing back toward his house, but when he reached his front door, he stopped cold. There, reflected in the glass of the door, was his own face, pale, wide-eyed, gasping for breath. But behind him stood another figure, one of the Watchers. It loomed silently, its dark form blending with the shadows, watching him from within his own home. Panicked, Daniel spun around, but the space behind him was empty. He glanced back at the glass, and there it was again, standing so close he could feel its cold presence. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the door, stumbling inside and locking it behind him. But as he looked around his dimly lit living room, his heart sank. They were everywhere, silent, unmoving, watching. Daniel dropped to his knees, his mind unraveling as the truth crashed down on him. There was no escape. They weren't following him. They had always been here, hidden in plain sight, woven into the fabric of his life, waiting, watching. And now, they were part of him forever, with a final, quiet resolve. Daniel let the weight of their gaze crush him. He no longer had to wonder why they were there. He knew, with terrifying certainty, that they had claimed him. The Watchers were never meant to be explained, never meant to be understood. They were simply there, and always would be.